Seneca expounds on the particular practicality of Stoicism in the face of human suffering in a series of articles, letters, essays, dialogues, essentially, or primarily letters, known as the consolation letters. Sorry. The consolation letters, a series of three, the most poignant of which he wrote to his own mother, or addressed to his own mother, where he explained how suffering is really not what it is made out to be if you ascribe to Stoic philosophy. He does this in roughly, scholars believe, like 42 AD, CE, whatever you want to call it, where he had been exiled to Corsica a year or so before. He had been accused of having a illicit adulterous affair with the sister of the Emperor Caligula, that moral paragon, and he had been exiled. So, okay, he's sent away. And he writes a letter to his mother, who he understands has been suffering, missing her son. And it is a particularly interesting letter for the way that it presents his human suffering or emotional distress as really, nothing at all. It's not something to bother with. And in fact, if you have the proper perspective, the proper Stoic perspective, you will rise above all that, and you just won't be bothered with all the little problems that are out there. So the consolation to his mother Helvia, or in the awkwardly pronounced Latin, De Consolatione ad Helviam Matrem. Seneca writes this, as I said, as a kind of hallmark card to his mother. It was a fairly established literary tradition of a genre of writing to ease the pain of certain human problems, the loss of a loved one or some such thing. The use of philosophy and the proper perspective, and just a lot of hand-holding and hand-patting and trying to get people to power through life's challenges. And here he's confronting his own mother about his own exile, because here he's somewhat an agent of her suffering, and he is also now trying to alleviate it, which produces some interesting dynamics, particularly in the very beginning of the letter. It is his loss that his mother that is causing his mother distress, and now he is coming back in writing and saying, tut tut, mother, don't fret. The way in which he does this, the ways in which he expresses his perspective is really quite remarkable. One recent translation by Peter Anderson captures some of the dynamics pretty pungently. I knew that I couldn't confront your sorrow while it was still fresh and causing pain, just in case the consolation itself aggravated and inflamed the sorrow. So here he's talking about how there's been some time past since he was exiled. He was exiled in like 41, and again, scholars think he wrote this like a year or maybe even two later. The way he's discussing this is interesting, where he seems to be like, well, yeah, I knew you were suffering, but it wasn't the right time. It wasn't prudent to address right immediately. I needed to let it settle. And although I had looked through all the great works of the most famous writers written to suppress and diminish grief, I couldn't find an example of someone writing to console his own family when he himself was the source of the sorrow. So you see this remarkably intellectualized approach right away, which is a weird tack, perhaps, to take with one's own mother, with with an emotionally fraught predicament like this, and he is saying, well, I would have spoken to you sooner, but that would have been illogical, so I had to get the timing just right. So this is a very strategic move on his part. He has thought about this quite a lot, it seems, and he is explaining the logic of why he is now addressing it. And then he points out that, well, I did my homework. I went and I studied all the ancient philosophers and those who have come before me, and I could not find an exact parallel to our situation, since I am the son who has so caused you suffering. In this, he references specifically that literary tradition of consolation that he is trying to practice right now, and he's admitting that, well, okay, I did my due diligence. I have tried to research this as any good intellectual would, but I have come up a little short. So here I am venturing into a new field, perhaps, or a branch of this literary tradition. It's an odd way, I would say, from a modern perspective, to engage with your parents when they're suffering, but it's something. Um, but then he actually gets very personal. There's a real sense of the pain that's going on right here, and the dynamics that are at play as he's describing them are just astounding. Fortune didn't give you a break from the deepest kinds of sorrows. Fortune didn't even allow the day you were born to be a happy one. You lost your mother as soon as you were born, or rather, while you were being born, and so you were abandoned just as your life was beginning. Pointing out that her own mother died at childbirth, that her life, his mom's life, Seneca's mother's life, has been marked by suffering from the very first breath. You remember, Mom, when giving birth to you killed your own mother, and how you had to grow up alone because of that. Um, he's stirring that up, but in the process, he's giving us, the reader, the information. We are suddenly aware, like, oh, okay, this woman has had some loss in her life. And so as readers, we are drawn in just a bit more, and this is made a little bit more poignant because we're understanding the emotional weight of this particular episode in this woman's full life. You lost a very affectionate uncle, an exceptional and brave man, just when you were expecting him to arrive home. More losses in the family, more pain that he is stirring up. You laid your beloved husband to rest 30 days later, with whom you had 3 children. Compounding that, really, turning the screw just a little bit more. It's drawing us in, but at the same time, it's kind of objectivizing his mother's pain in a disturbing way, because he's saying, you remember how much you've suffered, Mom. You remember all of the pain. Do you remember this episode? Do you remember that episode? Do you remember these others? And so there's this weird dynamic where, as a reader, personally, I feel like, lighten up, pal. Let's go easy on Mom. But the text is marching ahead irrespective of that. It's not letting me dwell on my empathetic moment. It's moving on. It says, only recently you took the bones of 3 grandchildren into your arm. 3 grandchildren have died. One of them, he says, 20 days after you buried my son. One of her grandchildren, and now Seneca's own child that he's talking about so objectively, dead in your arms with your kisses on his face. Such a dramatic image. The receiving of the bones and the kisses on her face, as if, it's still maybe a little damp. and now he's gone. That's a gripping image. That's a compelling image that draws you in. But still, there is this clinical objectivity, this forced objectivity. But it's him doing it. It's him sort of picking at that scab. And I have to wonder, is he doing it not intentionally, but almost involuntarily? It's as if the emotion of the moment is swelling up in him as he is describing the scope of suffering that they all have to go with, because he is talking here about his son. He does not name, but there's this weird dynamic happening. The recent wound, I confessed, is the most serious of those that have been inflicted upon you. If it didn't just break the skin, it split you right through the gut, which is again a very visceral, physical image for him to pull out here. He's really like grating at it. Now you can say that this is perhaps somebody in stark denial, and these emotions are welling up onto the page as he's expressing or trying to contain them, but the power of it is sort of overcoming. Or maybe he is demonstrating, this is the other perspective, maybe he is demonstrating, okay, I know exactly how much you've suffered. I have been with you on a lot of this suffering. My father died. My uncle died. Or my great uncle died. My child died. I have been along with that, and here I am able to talk about it objectively and not collapse in suffering and pain. He is Maybe he is trying to model the behavior, but in order to do that, he has to first raise the stakes just a little bit to show that he also has some skin in the game. But it's a hard dynamic to pull off. I'm not sure where he's going with this. I'm not sure where he falls. Again, objectively, it doesn't really matter. If you just approach it on a textual level, you see all these dynamics at play in there, and that's part of what makes it so rich. Um, he does he does show some of the inherent sexism of the age, I guess you could say, of any age. He does come off like a man at times. Put aside your lamenting and wailing the other ways women express their grief out loud, which is just a little sexist, which is, oh, you women, you're always so emotional. There is in this also perhaps a little hint of classism. Perhaps they are, aristocrats, but in the idea that, okay, you don't do this, the other people do this. We're better. Whether that's a class-based thing or a sign of his genuine individualized esteem for his mother as distinct from others, I'm not certain. But there is that little twinge of misogyny there, where he's pointing out that women, they're all wailers and complainers, but you can be a little different. You are not one of them, meaning that the others, are the common. They are the majority. That's what you would expect, which is an inherently misogynist position. He takes it up a notch, I would say, a little bit later, um, uh, in discussing the comparison with his mother and other women. A bit of an older translation. Unchastity, the greatest evil of the age, has never classed you with the majority of women. You have not been tempted either by gems or by pearls. Riches have not allured you into thinking them the greatest blessing that man can own, respectably brought up as you were in an old-fashioned and strict household, you have never been led astray by the imitation of others, which is so full of danger, even to virtuous women. Here he's saying that, well, you're not one of those common trollops who for a couple of nickels will get over their agony and just give in to carnal desires, perhaps. So he's clearly privileging his mother, but there's an undeniable, you're good because you're not an ordinary woman. There is a little something of that dynamic going on there, but you also see in that the classic Stoic disdain for worldly goods, or really anything of this world. When he talks about, for gems or pearls, he's talking about the distractions of material objects. In this case, specifically wealth, but that is emblematic of a general concern for anything of this world, because the proper Stoic would have his mind on the other world, the forms, the Platonic forms, the ideal world, the spiritual world that really matters. External things, which anyway don't have much power for good or bad, aren't all that important. Favorable circumstances don't lift a wise man up, and adversity doesn't get him down. He can always work hard to depend mostly on himself. Disdain of worldly goods is a core value of Stoicism, and here, this is what he is pinning his argument on. He's saying, Mom, you don't need to get dragged down into all of this self-pitying, all of this emotional wreckage, because it's all pointless. It's all just silly. You should just take refuge in consideration of what really matters. And that is the immaterial things. He runs through the arguments. He develops a little rhetorical conversation, a bit of a dialogue, where he's saying, well, you might object. Well, an exile like me might miss his fine clothes, his nice house, all of his sumptuous food, all the cushy lifestyle that he has. And he comes back and he says, no, that stuff does not matter. It's the spirit that makes men rich. It follows us into exile, and in our deepest isolation, after it is found enough to sustain the body, the spirit overflows with its own goods and enjoys them. Money matters no more to the spirit than to the immortal gods. Disdain of money. A comfortable position for a wealthy person to take. What does money mean? Well, he's got some. But also the privileging of the spirit over the body. The body might be hungry from time to time, but the body can actually live on, it doesn't need the really highfalutin food. It can get by on fairly common fare. And once that minimal animal level is satisfied, the mind is what really matters. The spirit is what really matters. Spirit is a loaded term, because it's important to recognize that in this, as he is disparaging money and disparaging worldly goods and privileging the spirit over all things, this is coming about in the early 40s, at exactly the time that throughout the certain pockets of the Roman Empire, there's a lot of scuttlebutt going on about this guy named Jesus Christ. And there is a bit of a cult forming that disdains things of this world, that privileges the poor over the rich, which is, not what Rome wants to hear. and this belief that another world, another level of existence, another plane of reality, if you will, is what really matters, and that this world is just what we have to suffer through and endure. But if we keep in mind what's coming, what's really important, what's coming after, or something like that, that makes this world much more tolerable and puts it all into the proper perspective. And the disparaging of the body just keeps coming up. The spirit is weighted down as it is by these limbs and these heavy bag of bones. The body is the spirit's guardian and prison. This constant reference to disdaining of the body, which is going to in another couple hundred years be get taken up and developed by Saint Augustine. This notion of the body is just physical, the body is worldly, and it just doesn't matter. The You get this refrain coming through of focus on what matters, focus on the world. Don't worry about me, your son, suffering physical hardships or difficulties or discomfort in any way. I mean, he was sent to Corsica, not to Siberia, for God's sakes. But just be assured that I am as happy as I could possibly be, because now now I fill my days with thoughts of what really matters, and I engage in the kind of philosophical exercise that lifts me above any discomfort I might feel on a physical level. And he compels her to do the same thing. He tells her, what you need is philosophy, or in this translation, the liberal arts, the study. If you study, you occupy your mind and you rise above the ordinary complaints and worries. The studies will give you comfort and pleasure, and if they enter your spirit in good faith, sorrow and pain will never enter again. Studies are the surest protection and are the only thing that can snatch you up from fortune's grasp. Fortune, of course, entering here and throughout as a classical Roman symbol of the turnings and twistings of fate, often seen as rather capricious. This obviously does not fit so much into the Christian paradigm, where it is an ordered universe and God, the one God, is omnipotent. But you can see how he is, again, in a tumultuous time, just saying, just rise above it. Stoicism says, just take what the world is as it is and say, okay, fine. I'm not going to get terribly concerned with it. I'm not going to be terribly upset by it, because realistically, it all doesn't matter, because I'm going to dwell on what really, really matters. And the end of the letter comes in chapter 20, a very famous wind up, if you will, where he tries to convince his mother that things are good with him. He says, "Indeed, these days are my best, because my mind is relieved from all pressure of business, and is at leisure to attend to its own affairs, and at one time amuses itself with lighter studies, at another eagerly presses its inquiries into its own nature and that of the universe. First it considers the countries of the world and their position, then the character of the sea which flows between them, and the alternate ebbings and flowings of its tides. Next it investigates all the terrors which hang between heaven and earth, the region which is torn asunder by thunderings, lightnings, gusts of wind, vapors, showers of snow and hail. Finally, having traversed every one of the realms below, it soars to the highest heaven, enjoys the noblest of all spectacles, that of things divine, and, remembering itself to the eternal, reviews all that has been and all that will be forever and ever. Wow, that's that's a beautiful image. That's an extraordinary perspective. It's you could say that it's somewhat trite advice to give to a mother who is suffering and who has suffered. Give the woman her due. She's allowed to have some autonomy in her own emotions, and her son telling her, "Well, no, just rise above them, ignore them, and contemplate the advanced thoughts of our greatest philosophers." He doesn't. He gives throughout some indications that his mother is really quite intelligent and perhaps even could read, but this would put her at a great exception from the vast majority of women of her time. For the most part, they were not educated at all. They could not read, even the ladies of wealthy households. So telling her that, well, no, you need to focus on taking up and reading some philosophy. That's cold comfort, if you will. That is not fully consolation, but it is consolation that Stoics offer. And that's what they have to provide at this. This is their contribution to the world. The perspective that you just power through the ordinary stuff and keep your mind focused on what really matters: justice, ethics, good. What is the best we can think of in a world that is often the worst it can be? It is an effective tool for some. For others, it might seem a little feeble. But as a philosophical position, it has a remarkable, it lays down a remarkable marker in the history of philosophy and thought and literature, quite frankly, where it is a straining for idealism in a world that you acknowledge is not ideal and that must be dealt with in some way. But Stoicism offers itself as a tool for dealing with that and not being dragged under into the hubbub of emotional suffering, of worldly tumult, of the ordinary pain of being a human being. Stoicism is at least a strategy for dealing with that.